The sun stood still, it seemed, over Cotton Hollow that day, the kind of heat that made even shadows retreat and men forget their manners. Dust curled around Boots like smoke around guilt, and in the center of town, someone had placed a rough plank across two hay bales. It wasn't a stage. It wasn't a platform. It was an auction block. And on it stood Eleanor May Whitlow, 25, a widow, and barren. She stood barefoot, the soles of her feet dusted red from the earth, and the hem of her dress black, still, though her husband had been dead near a year, hung limp as if morning had wrung it dry. She had no hat. No gloves. Her eyes fixed on the bell tower, not the crowd. Anything to keep from looking at their pity, or worse, their judgment. Ezekiel Whitlow, her father, stood beside her in his Sunday coat. It was buttoned up high despite the heat, as though pride could keep him cool. His gray beard had been combed, his boots polished. He held a ledger in one hand, and his voice rang out like a rusted bell. She's a good girl. Silent. Teachable. Ain't never once raised her voice. A pause. Can't give children, but she'll make a house shine. And she won't shame you in town. Eleanor didn't flinch. She had practiced that part. She was a Whitley widow, Ezekiel added, scanning the faces before him. Married up for a time. Now she's back home, and I won't keep a mouth that don't feed legacy. That part hurt. A quiet, splintered ache under the ribs. But still, no flinch. The crowd was mostly men. Dust-covered, dry-eyed men with cracked knuckles and boots worn smooth from hard living. A few wives stood at the edges, whispering into parasols. There were no mothers. No sisters. No one to step in. Someone coughed. Someone else said, too loud, "What good is a wife who won't bear young?" The word "won't" pricked like a thorn. As if it had been a choice. As if her womb had folded its arms and refused. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the edge of the crowd, where a man stood half in shadow, half in sun. Tall. Brown-skinned. Still. His long black hair was tied in a thick braid down his back, and beside him were two small girls holding hands, each no taller than a rain barrel. He wasn't looking at Ezekiel. He was looking at Eleanor. Not with hunger. Not with pity. Just watching. Steady as a mountain. As if he could see what others chose not to. Ezekiel cleared his throat. Ain't no starting bid? Gentlemen, she ain't sick. She can clean, cook, mend. Hell, she can ride better than some of you. Laughter. Dry. Cruel. Mrs. Flannery, whose voice was oil in every ear, whispered behind a fan, "Maybe the Apache fellow'll take her. Lord knows he ain't got shame." The man didn't react. Eleanor stared down at her hands. They were folded neatly in front of her, fingers white at the knuckles. She imagined them as someone else's. Softer hands. Worth holding. Not these pale, papery things that had folded too many linens and opened too many graves. Ezekiel's voice turned sharp. $1. Just $1 for a woman who won't bite your hand or break your peace. Silence. Flies buzzed around the trough. The wind gave up. The sun shifted slightly. A voice low, almost shy, cut through the heat like cool water. I will give her a home. Heads turned. Boots shuffled. Even the horses flicked their ears. The Apache stepped forward, his daughters trailing behind him like two tiny shadows. He walked slowly, deliberately, not asking permission from the crowd nor looking for reaction. Just stepping forward because he meant what he said. Ezekiel blinked. You'll what? I do not buy women. I offer a home. For her. And for me. If she chooses. The twins looked up at Eleanor with eyes wide and blinking. Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time since her husband's funeral, her chest filled, not with hope, exactly, but with the memory that once, she'd had it. The preacher stepped forward, brow furrowed. Sir, this isn't a courting ground. This is a family matter. The Apache nodded. Then let her family decide. And he looked not at Ezekiel, but at Eleanor. And that's when she spoke. Quiet, steady, not quite her own voice, yet not borrowed either. I'd rather live beside the river with someone who doesn't need my wound to love me than in a house where silence is called obedience. Gasps. The preacher's mouth hung open. Ezekiel's face reddened. You'll throw your name away for a stranger? For a heathen? Eleanor stepped down off the block. Her steps were slow, barefoot still, but her back was straighter than it had been in years. I already threw it away the day you sold me with a ledger. The Apache stepped back to give her room. Didn't reach for her. Just nodded once. She turned to him. What's your name? Taza. And them? Luma. Talitha. The girl smiled, and one offered a daisy, its petals bent, but still brave. Eleanor took it. Behind them, the town murmured like a rising wind, gossip growing roots. But she didn't care. Not today. As they walked away, Ezekiel's voice chased after her. Don't come back here, Eleanor May. You hear me? Don't come back when he leaves you. She didn't answer. Taza offered her a shawl to drape over her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and horses. The girls danced ahead, giggling, running after grasshoppers in the dry brush. She looked once over her shoulder, not at her father, but at the block. And then she looked ahead, where the river sang faintly beyond the rise. She didn't know what kind of life awaited her. But at least it would be hers. And the man beside her hadn't asked for a womb. He'd asked nothing at all. Yet he had seen her. And that, somehow, was everything. Eleanor woke to the soft rustle of cotton skirts against straw and the muted giggle of two girls outside her door. The room was small and dim, its only window casting a pale golden stripe across the clay floor. The bed she lay in wasn't much rough-woven sheets, a creaking frame, but it held no weight of judgment. That alone made it feel like mercy. The first morning in Taza's home passed like a whispered question. No one knocked. No one called her to task. She half expected to be shaken awake by a father's bark or to hear the dry voice of her late husband echoing cruel instructions from a dream. But the house held only quiet. That, and the faint smell of warm stone and river moss. She rose slowly and washed her face in the basin, her reflection broken by ripples. Her old dress still hung from her shoulders like borrowed shame. She combed her hair, unsure why, and stepped into the outer room with the silence of a woman trained to take up less space. Taza was gone. The girls, Luma and Talitha, sat at a small table, legs swinging. They had apples in their hands and laughter on their cheeks. When they saw her, they paused, unsure, until Luma slipped down, held up a small bird carved from wood, and said, "It's for you." Eleanor took it. The carving was simple, smooth from small fingers. The bird's wings were outstretched. It looked ready to fly. "Thank you," she whispered. They smiled. Then darted out the open door like shadows chasing the wind. She stood alone in the middle of the room. A basket of corn sat on the counter. A kettle near the hearth still warm. Everything clean, purposeful, but lived in. There was no woman's touch here, only effort. It humbled her. She placed the bird on the mantel and began kneading dough. The silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. That evening, when Taza returned, he said nothing. Just placed a small bundle of herbs on the table and sat on the floor, whittling. The girls crawled onto his lap. They whispered stories in Apache, and he nodded, carving as if the rhythm of their words guided his blade. Eleanor placed a fresh loaf of bread on the table. Then stepped back. Taza looked up. Not at the bread, but at her. "Did the river call to you today?" he asked softly. "No. But I listened," she replied. He nodded. That was all. The next day, Eleanor swept the floors, not because anyone asked, but because the dust underfoot felt like the past still trying to settle. She found herself humming. Not a hymn. Just a tune she once knew when life was simpler. The girls peeked in again. Talitha held up a petal. "It smells like Mama's soap," she said. Eleanor crouched. "May I see?" Talitha handed it over. It was just a crushed wildflower, but it did smell faintly of lavender. "They miss her," Taza said later, standing behind her at the stove. Eleanor didn't turn. "I miss a woman I never met." He didn't answer, but the silence between them felt less like distance and more like a thread being tied, softly, steadily. That night, she sat outside, her bare feet in the dust, eyes on the moon. She thought of the years she had spent begging her body to bloom, watching every month come and go with aching silence. Her late husband had scowled. His mother had hissed prayers under her breath like curses meant to cleanse her. She had scrubbed floors until her hands cracked, as if cleanliness could coax life from a womb that had no music. Now, here, in this quiet place, she felt the ache again, but this time it wasn't shame. It was softness. Hunger, even, for something unnamed. The next morning, she found a second loaf of bread left untouched. The girls had eaten berries and gone to play. The bread sat there, still warm, untouched. Next to it, another wooden bird. She blinked. Realized suddenly it had been meant for her again. Not to feed others. Not to serve. Just, for her. Bread for the birds, not the table. She sat down slowly. Took a bite. It was sweet. Later, as she walked to the stream to wash, she passed Taza working the fence. He looked up but didn't speak. She paused. "You've made room for me," she said. He drove the post deeper into the earth. "The house was always too quiet. I thought you brought me for the girls." He set the hammer down, straightened. "I brought you because I saw a woman with no place, and a home with no music. I thought they could fix each other." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not healed." He walked past her, pausing just enough to murmur, "That's not the same as being broken." She spent that afternoon mending clothes. Not because she owed him, but because she wanted the girls to look like the hope they carried. She stitched daisies into the hems. Later, when they saw the new flowers on their skirts, the girls squealed and ran circles around her. They called her Ina, not mother, but something softer. A word that meant warmth where there was none before. She didn't cry. Not then. But when night came, and the fire crackled low, and the wind whistled through the chimney like a lullaby, she sat by the hearth, holding that wooden bird, and let the tears fall in peace. The next morning, Taza handed her a small knife. The handle carved with feather shapes. "For what?" she asked. "For your own birds," he replied. And that was how healing began. Not with vows. Not with apologies. But with a knife, a loaf of bread, and the quiet permission to carve something of her own. She didn't know what to call it yet. But it was hers. It was market day in Cotton Hollow, and the dust rolled in slow clouds beneath the wagon wheels and boots of people who came to trade goods and sharpen rumors. The sound of barter filled the square like a restless tide, coins clinking, chickens squawking, gossip flying low and wide. Beneath it all, the echo of Eleanor May's name swirled like a feather caught in wind, light but insistent. She had not been back to town since the auction. Today, she wore a pale blue calico dress she had resewn from one of Taza's trade cloths. Her hair was braided with a thin leather cord the girls had plaited in while giggling, whispering that it made her look like the moon. There was a slice of hesitance in her steps, but she walked tall beside Taza, her hands carrying a basket of cloth dolls and smoked herbs. The girls ran ahead, weaving between horses and trade stalls, their laughter trailing behind like songbirds. Taza walked silent beside Eleanor, his wide frame quieting stares before they became voices. But nothing could stop eyes. Eleanor felt them like thorns, curious, measuring, sharp. Mrs. Flannery was the first to speak. She stood behind a barrel of ribbons, her bonnet perfectly perched, lips pursed with practiced disapproval. "Well, bless my heart," she said, loud enough for half the square to hear. Didn't know the Whitlow girl still had it in her to show face. Eleanor's smile didn't falter. "I'm here for the children," she replied, holding up one of the dolls she'd sewn. "They deserve things made with care." "Oh? Mrs. Flannery arched an eyebrow. And did you make them while living in sin, or just regular shame? Taza took a step forward, but Eleanor gently touched his arm. It's all right, she murmured, then looked back at the older woman. No shame in being chosen when others discarded you, she said. No sin in being useful again. Around them, the market slowed. One man mumbled, wasn't she sold? Another said, heard he's raising her like a third daughter. Another, well, least the kids look happy. The girls ran back, arms full of apples given freely by a kind old vendor. Look, Ina, they called. Eleanor smiled, soft, open, unguarded. That was when the town saw it. The smile. It wasn't the tight-lipped grin of obedience they remembered from her husband's days. It wasn't a forced courtesy of a pastor's daughter. It was sunlight after drought, fragile, sure, but real. She looked not like a woman endured, but a woman unfolding. And some of them didn't know what to do with that. Miss Whitlow, a voice asked behind her. She turned to see Sheriff Callan Hayes, hat in hand, ice-tired. He had been the one to turn his face away during the auction. Now he looked as if he'd found something buried under his own silence. Glad you came back, he said. Folks the been wonderin'. She gave a nod. I'm not the same one that left. No, he said. You ain't. They passed by the general store. Eleanor noticed a faded piece of embroidery in the window, one she had sewn 2 years ago, still unsold. Her initials stitched in the corner like a wound. She stepped inside and asked to buy it back. The shopkeep blinked. Buy your own cloth? She placed a few coins on the counter. No. I'm buying back my name. When she stepped out again, Taza looked at her, a slow question in his gaze. She held up the embroidery. It's crooked and half-stained, she said, but I made it when I still hoped someone would want what I made. And now, he asked. Now I want it. That night, they camped under a tree halfway home. The twins had fallen asleep curled together on a shared blanket, faces smudged with berry juice and dirt. Taza sat nearby, sharpening his blade by firelight. Eleanor stood at the edge of the stream, her bare feet in the cool current. She looked at the moon's reflection trembling in the water. I used to walk this same street in silence, she said. Folks would pass me like a ghost. I think I forgot how to be visible. Taza's voice was low. You were never invisible. Just unseen. She turned, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. And you? What do they say about you? He looked at the fire. That I took what no one wanted. That I am raising a woman like I raised the girls. She moved to sit beside him, the heat from the flame brushing her shoulder. What do you say? She asked. I say, he murmured, that your smile makes my daughters believe the world can be kind again. That is enough for me. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, softly, she reached into her basket and pulled out a cone she had carved herself. Simple. Uneven. But made with care. She placed it in his palm. He turned it slowly, ran a thumb along the edge. Birds, he said. They're flying home, she whispered. He looked up. And you? She met his gaze without flinching. I think I already arrived. The fire cracked and settled. The wind rustled the leaves like a lullaby for grown things. Somewhere beyond them, the town whispered still. But here, in this space they'd carved together, only truth remained. And the next time Eleanor smiled, she didn't care who saw it. The old shoes were worn down to the sole, no laces, one heel missing, the leather cracked like dry earth after flood. They'd been wrapped in a cloth faded from sunlight and sorrow, and now they lay cradled in Taza's hands like a relic that still carried breath. The girls watched him carefully, their small fingers clutching Eleanor's skirt, as he knelt in the garden behind their home. Eleanor didn't ask questions. She simply followed as he began to dig. Their mother wore these the day she died, he said, voice low, almost reverent. She walked down to the stream for water. Fevered. Staggering. I begged her to stay inside. but she was always stronger than she looked. He paused. The dirt was soft from rain the night before, and each shovel of earth released a smell that reminded Eleanor of turned seasons, something old being made ready for something new. She never came back, he continued. The girls found her. Her hands were blue. Eleanor placed her hand on Talitha's head and whispered something only the child could hear. The girl nodded solemnly. We never buried the shoes, Taza said. I didn't know if I should. But they've lingered too long. The girls can't sleep near them anymore. Eleanor reached out. Then let's give them rest. Together, they lowered the shoes into the earth. Taza placed a braid of sweetgrass beside them. Luma, barely 5, whispered a prayer in Apache. Eleanor didn't understand the words, but the feeling in them made her eyes sting. Ashes don't cry, she thought. But I do. Later, as dusk painted the sky in layers of burnt orange and bruised violet, Eleanor sat at the edge of the porch with the carved bird Taza had given her on the first day. She turned it over and over in her hand, thinking about how something so small could carry so much meaning. She began carving her own now, clumsy at first, but getting better. Behind her, Taza stepped out, his moccasins silent against the wooden floor. You speak gently with the dead, he said. I used to speak only to them, she replied. They were the only ones who didn't tell me I'd failed. He sat beside her. Your husband blamed you. He said I was a locked box. That no man wants a woman who gives nothing back. Taza didn't speak. He didn't argue or offer comfort. He simply listened, which was somehow more healing than any words might have been. I hated myself for what my body wouldn't give, she said, staring out at the shadowed field. But the worst part wasn't the empty cradle, it was the way people looked at me like I was spoiled. Les. Taza turned his head. And now? I don't feel empty here. Not like I did. A long silence stretched between them. The sound of the wind through dry grass. The distant laughter of children. A horse shifting in its sleep. I don't want to be a burden, she said finally. Not to you. Not to the girls. I need you to know, I never expected your kindness. He looked at her then. Fully. The firelight from inside flickered across his face, catching the sadness etched deep in his brow. When I was a boy, he began slowly, my mother told me that kindness is not a gift. It's a seed. You plant it even when there's no rain, and wait. It's not about what grows. It's about choosing to plant. Eleanor exhaled, and it felt like something old leaving her chest. She leaned back, resting her shoulder against the porch post. The wood was warm, the night air full of summer's last breath. You've given your girls roots, she said. I hope I can give them something to reach for. They already reach for you, he murmured. You just haven't noticed. She turned to him. And you? Do you reach for me? He was quiet for a long time. When the auction happened, he said at last, I didn't plan to speak. But I saw you standing there, not bowed, not begging. Just refusing to disappear. And I thought, that's what I want my daughters to learn. Her throat caught. What? To stand like that. Even when no one wants you. Her hand found his, hesitant but steady. I don't know how to love like you, she said. He shook his head. You already do. You leave warm bread for people who never ask. You sew stitches with your heart in the thread. You tell my girls they are bright when the world tries to dim them. She laughed softly, surprised by the sound. Then I've loved quietly, I suppose. That's the only kind worth keeping. The door creaked open behind them, and Luma appeared with sleepy eyes and a folded blanket. For you, she said, handing it to Eleanor. Taza took the girl in his arms, pressing a kiss to her head before carrying her inside. Eleanor remained on the porch, staring into the night. The stars blinked slowly overhead, as if even the heavens weren't in a rush. She laid the blanket across her lap, fingers curling into its softness. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a leftover. She felt gathered. Inside the house, the fire dimmed, casting soft shadows on the walls. She watched through the window as Taza lifted Talitha from the floor and placed her gently on the cot beside her sister. He covered them, then lingered, his large frame somehow tender in the dim glow. He brushed a stray curl from Talitha's brow, then turned and saw Eleanor watching. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, Eleanor knew. This was a man who had not saved her. He had let her save herself. And tomorrow, when the sun returned, she would tell him that in her own quiet way. Because ashes don't cry. But she did. And now, the tears were soft. Holy. Like rain falling on seeds that had been waiting far too long to grow. The wind arrived first. It swept through Cotton Hollow like a memory unburied snapping cloth from lines, rattling shutters, and lifting Taza's hat from his head as he rode slowly into town beside Eleanor and the girls. He didn't chase it. Just watched as it tumbled down the road like a discarded prayer. Eleanor reached over and steadied the reins, her eyes fixed not on the hat, but on what waited ahead. A crowd had gathered near the church steps, where Sheriff Hayes stood with folded arms and the look of a man caught between the letter of the law and the weight of conscience. Behind him, Ezekiel Whitlow paced like a dog too long chained, his coat newly pressed, his voice already raised. She was never legally married, he barked to the sheriff, to the sky, to anyone who would listen. She was auctioned, traded like property, no preacher, no papers. That Apache took her in like a squatter takes a house. I'm her next of kin, and I'm tucking her back. Eleanor dismounted slowly, handing the reins to Luma, who stood quietly beside her sister. The crowd parted only enough to let her through. Murmurs followed her steps, thin and sharp like sewing needles. She's back in town? Didn't know a man could steal a woman and get thanks for it. Her womb's dead but her pride's growing. She said nothing. Just walked to the base of the steps and looked her father in the eye. I'm not yours to take, she said. Ezekiel scoffed. I raised you. Fed you. Cleaned up after that no-good husband of yours when he died and left you broken. You raised me like a tree you meant to chop down. The sheriff cleared his throat. There's a petition filed under Ezekiel's name, claiming you're not under lawful protection or care. I'm not cattle, Eleanor replied, voice calm. I don't need to be under anything. She's living in sin, Ezekiel snapped. No marriage, no papers, no pastor. That's not a wife. That's a woman playing house with heathens. Eleanor turned to the crowd. Not to plead. Not to justify. Just to speak. Do you know what a real marriage is? She said, her voice steady despite the wind. It's not a dress. Not a ring. It's a man teaching your daughters how to forgive their mother's absence with patience, not silence. It's someone who sits beside you and listens when all you offer is brokenness. It's bread on your side of the table. It's carved birds and quiet kindness. Ezekiel's face flushed. You're embarrassing your name. I left that name behind the day you sold me. The crowd was silent. Somewhere in the back, Mrs. Flannery wiped her eyes but said nothing. Even she knew this wasn't gossip anymore, it was reckoning. Sheriff Hayes unfolded a sheet of parchment. According to the letter of the law, he began, no marriage license was issued. But... He glanced at Taza, who had joined Eleanor now, standing beside her like a rooted pine. Law isn't always the same as right. He tore the paper slowly, deliberately, and let it fall like ash to the ground. Ezekiel lunged forward, but Taza stepped between them, not with fists, but with stillness. You raised a girl you never saw, he said quietly. Now the woman she became has no room for you. Ezekiel spat on the ground, but his hands stayed lowered. There was nothing left in him that Eleanor needed. She turned, took Taza's hand, and together they walked down the steps. Luma and Talitha ran to them, wrapping their arms around her legs. She lifted one, Taza the other, and they began the slow walk out of town. As they passed the general store, Eleanor paused. That same embroidery, the one she had bought back, was hanging in the window again. But this time, it wasn't stained. It had been pressed and framed. Someone had added a tag beneath it. Made by a woman who didn't quit. She smiled. They reached the edge of town when the wind came again, fierce and playful. Taz's hat flew up once more, caught in the dance of dust and sky. He laughed, reaching for it. But Eleanor caught it first. She placed it on her head, crooked and proud. "I think I'll keep it," she said. Taza tilted his head. "You'll steal from me?" "I didn't steal," she whispered. "I chose." They walked on, four shadows stretching long toward the fading sun. No preacher's bell. No town blessing. But Eleanor didn't need either. The storm had passed. And she had been it.